Now, what I found so interesting about Acts chapter 4 was that the marks of bold faith in Acts chapter 4 are eerily identical to what Jesus said would mark the lives of his disciples in the Gospels. And before we get into the text, I want to show you that in the Gospels so that you can see the connection that I believe I see. In the Gospels, Jesus uses the words "my disciple" 6 different times. I don't know if you knew this. He uses the word disciple 11 times, but he uses the words "my disciple" together 6 different times. He uses them 3 times negatively. You cannot be my disciple. He uses 3 times negatively in Luke chapter 14, verses 25 to 33. He says things like, if you do not love me more than your mother and your father, then you cannot be my disciple. He says, if you do not love me more than even your own self, in fact, if you do not take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. At the end, in verse 33, he says, if you do not renounce all that you have, you cannot be my disciple. Basically, Jesus is saying, if you want to be a disciple of mine, when it comes down to a choice between me and your earthly dearest, your family or your spouse or whoever it may be, that you prioritize me in the affections of your heart over them. And that may lead you to make difficult choices, but that's what it means to walk as my disciples. That's the life of faith. Faith is choosing to trust in Jesus when there is a competitor for the affection of your heart or for the allegiance of your trust. You're choosing to trust in Christ, even when it doesn't always make sense, even when it's difficult. That's the life of faith. So it's that way with your earthly dearest, your family. It's that way with yourself. Maybe you could choose to do sexuality your way, choose to do this relationship your way, or you can choose to do it the way that Jesus has prescribed. And a disciple of Jesus, the way you mature as a disciple is to say, I'm going to trust in Jesus' view of sexuality instead of my own. I'm going to trust in his view of finances instead of my own. It's loving Jesus more than your family or your earthly dearest. It's loving Jesus more than yourself. And then in verse 33, it's loving Jesus more than your stuff. And nothing competes for our heart's affections quite like our financial portfolio or our jobs or the money in the bank. And nothing creates fear in our life more quickly than losing the stability of a job or something like that. But Jesus says you cannot be my disciple unless you're choosing to find your peace and security and safety in who I am for you and what I can do. I know that's a heavy call, right? That's Luke chapter 14. The heading of that says the cost of discipleship. But it's not just what you lose in becoming a disciple of Jesus. That's really a description of the life of faith. Faith chooses to trust in the Lord even when you don't have all your questions answered, even when it doesn't quite make sense. And isn't that exactly what you see in Acts chapter 4? In Acts chapter 4, the church is finally beginning to experience opposition. They've been threatened with their lives. They've been thrown in jail. They've just gotten released. When we picked it up in Acts chapter 4, verse 31, they're in a little prayer meeting and they're praying, God. They're basically saying, God, even though life is difficult right now, even though things don't make sense, we're going to continue to trust you. That's walking by faith.